Okay, time for another raging controversy that is sourced to anonymous intelligence community officials who have made claims that cannot be independently evaluated by anybody, but nonetheless give rise to a raft of frenzied, eager speculation that this could finally bring down Trump. Have you heard this song before? Have you seen this movie before? Because if you were at all conscious from the beginning of Trump's presidency up until now, actually even predating his presidency, you'd know that there have been factions within the intelligence apparatus that have been adamantly opposed to various things Trump has done and have sought to use various methods to bring him down, quote unquote, using leaks, using other tactics, and we have another iteration of that now. To add a qualifier, it's very possible, it's not without plausibility, that Trump could have genuinely done something illicit over the phone that indicates some kind of corrupt deal with some foreign leader. So to step back, the issue now is that there is a whistleblower complaint, quote unquote, that was lodged with the Inspector General of the intelligence community, and now there's a dispute over whether that complaint has to be transferred to Congress and whether the substance of the complaint can be publicized. And the issue under contestation is whether, because the complaint has to do with Trump's personal conduct in the context of communications with foreign leaders, whether that is within his discretion to keep private or because it is being reflected in a whistleblower complaint, whether it has to be released. Now, bear in mind that if you are in a position where you can be evaluating Trump's private conversations with foreign leaders, you have to have some high-level position, you'd think, within the intelligence apparatus. So you're an NSA analyst of some kind, or whatever the case may be. So it's not as though you could be this outsider looking in, or you could be somebody who occupies a traditional role of a whistleblower, which is that you're low on the totem pole and you come across genuine corruption, you discover something that's genuinely untoward or even criminal, and then you go through various channels to register that complaint because you're very public spirited and you're willing even to incur personal risk to make sure that the public, or at least the relevant reporting agencies, are aware of this potentially criminal or unethical conduct. No, probably not in this situation because, again, you have to be fairly high level to be privy to the phone conversations of the president. Or at least you'd think. This is all preliminary at this point. Who knows exactly what machinations went on behind the scenes that led to this complaint being filed on August 12th. Now, the Inspector General at least determined that the complaint was credible enough that it, in theory, would by law have to be given to Congress. But let's just unpack that for a moment, because look at what the actual statute prescribes in terms of what would constitute a credible complaint within the context of the intelligence community for a whistleblower. It would have to do with, quote, a violation of laws, rules, or regulations, or mismanagement, gross waste of funds, abuse of authority, or a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. Now, if you don't like how Trump conducts foreign policy for whatever reason, if you believe that he is excessively transactional, if you think that his style of personal diplomacy with various leaders is not within the best interest of the U.S., you could conceivably fashion a case that his conduct of foreign policy, which is squarely within the ambit of the president, who can do basically whatever he wants in the foreign policy domain. Not that that's a great thing, but it's the reality given how comprehensively power has been delegated to the unilateral executive by Congress. If you are in a position within the intelligence community where you just dislike, for whatever reason, how Trump goes about his business in the foreign policy domain, it's conceivable that you could then craft a case that Trump's diplomatic style constitutes something like an abuse of authority or a specific danger to public safety. Right? So let's say that Trump, in an alternative universe, was making a commitment to the Iranian leadership that he was not going to take military action against them under any circumstance. That's just a hypothetical, right? If you're somebody within the national security apparatus who believes that Iran is a grave danger, then Trump's assurance could, theoretically, based on your subjective interpretation, amount to a danger to the public health and safety of the American people. So you have to qualify all this by recognizing that whatever complaint was lodged is going to be filtered through the biases of somebody who is imbued with the ideology of the security state and uses those biases, or those biases inform what they determine to be an abuse of authority or a public health or safety risk, right? So that's why the frenzied speculation, which seems to automatically assume because that this person is described as a whistleblower, he or she therefore must have infallible motivations or must be operating purely to inform the public about something that is being done to harm them, that needs to be forestalled, because given the history of the Trump presidency, we know that there are many people within these agencies. You might call them the deep state or you might not. I think that's not a helpful way of necessarily contextualizing what this actually consists of. But people in positions of authority have used their own subjective determinations about what would constitute a danger to public safety, and then use that as justification to pursue whatever method that they deemed appropriate to counteract Trump or to blow the whistle against Trump. Andrew McCabe would be a perfect example of that. He opened this counterintelligence investigation on Trump because he essentially thought that Trump's conduct of foreign policy posed a national security threat. And obviously he likely would not admit that that was just a product of his own subjective biases, and it wasn't simply an objective assessment of some law being broken or some rule or regulation being flouted. It was an ideological calculation on his part. And that could be very well the case for whoever this quote-unquote whistleblower is. Now, the term whistleblower kind of connotes virtue, and many whistleblowers are virtuous. But simply because somebody went through the whistleblowing mechanism of the intelligence community to register their complaint doesn't mean that the complaint itself was necessarily virtuous or necessarily unimpeachable ethically. It simply means that they used that avenue to register a complaint about Trump. And so the bottom line is you have to be skeptical of the validity of this complaint. And of course, journalists will automatically basically presume that it meant that Trump was engaged in some kind of horrendous corrupt conduct, which wouldn't put it past him. But the subtext is, of course, that it involved Russia, because Trump had a phone call with Putin on July 31st, which was a couple weeks prior to the complaint being registered. And so, obviously, the automatic insinuation is that Trump was making some kind of corrupt deal with Putin. I mean, don't you think we would have probably found out about that already? Does that seem plausible to you? Doesn't seem that plausible, frankly, but that has never stopped members of the media from making implausible pronouncements about the supposedly illicit Trump-Putin relationship, notwithstanding the special counsel investigation, which really found nothing to that effect, obviously, and so on and so forth. Now, what is going to be the consequence of this? Probably nothing that substantial, although you can't make that determination conclusively, obviously. But it's going to continue to feed this just sort of ambient perception that Trump is in a corrupt relationship with Russia, even though Russia has not even been identified as the country at issue. Because any innuendo or any potential possible reference to Russia having corrupt influence over Trump is automatically amplified to the nth degree by the media. So those are all just some words of caution to better process this news. Now, the New York Times reported today that no single communication was at the root of the complaint. So apparently it's a pattern of communications or actions that drove this individual to make the whistleblower complaint. And that even further heightens why one should be skeptical of it, because it means that there is an even greater potential for subjectivity. Meaning, if you're not just alarmed by one phone call, rather you are making a more robust assessment of a pattern of behavior, then that's just an inherently a more subjective determination. And so that, I think, should give people even greater pause before just running around and screaming that this is the downfall of the Trump presidency, which has not come to pass in many prior episodes where people said the same thing. So people are proffering all kinds of possible explanations as to what this could have consisted of. Just wait and see, because usually when you just wait and see, things are not quite what they seem, and the initial declarations of how this is some kind of blockbuster development fall apart. That's been the pattern that you don't need to be an intelligence official anonymously whispering to anybody to observe. All right. Talk to you later.